first. With just a week left until half-term, it's looking increasingly likely that the government will miss the deadline it set itself to offer vaccinations to all school pupils in England. Robin Walker, the new schools minister, made suggestions that the health department is to blame, as he called for faster progress from the NHS earlier this week. But with reports of anti-vax campaigners targeting schools and threatening teachers, who is really to blame? And also, have schools been left to pick up the pieces without any firm guidance on how they should be handling this stage of the pandemic? Niamh Sweeney is a secondary school teacher in Cambridge and an executive member of Teachers Union, the National Education Union. Niamh, good afternoon. Thanks for giving us your time.
Good afternoon, Alexis.
Good afternoon. Also, we have with us Sarah Saul, a parent and a campaigner for SafeEd for All. Sarah, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Alexis.
Niamh, I'm really keen to find out what is happening at schools. This sort of came to my mind. I've got a 15-year-old daughter in a state school in Brent here in northwest London. There has been no information to kids. She came back one day after school. She said, quite a lot of kids in my class are not going to be taking up the vaccine. And they've been talking about all sorts of things in classrooms. And I said, well, what have your teachers been saying to the kids? Because some of these issues raised are things that we've dealt with on this programme with Full Fact, a lot of misinformation surrounding the vaccines. And I was expecting that teachers would step in to correct kids when they were spreading misinformation in the class. But it seems that teachers are taking a bit of a back seat when it comes to the vaccines, as if they don't really want to be involved, as if they are a little bit too worried about the reaction from parents. Tell us what's happening in the classrooms.
I think the reality is, Alexis, I teach 16 to 19-year-olds, and the majority of them hastily went out as soon as they were able to get their first vaccine. The 12 to 15-year-olds who unfortunately are still waiting are, as I believe, very anxious. I don't believe teachers are shirking away from their responsibility at any point of this pandemic. We have been at the front line making sure that children and their families and communities were protected. But it has become very difficult to manage misinformation, disinformation on social media and how that passes through the classroom because the rollout of vaccines has been so slow. So the government announced that it would happen and then nothing did. So letters haven't gone out to parents saying when they will take place. It's not the school giving the vaccines, they're just hosting the vaccination centres. And it's as if again, the Department of Education has just made an announcement without thinking through how the vaccination programme is able to cope in this couple of weeks when the booster programme and the flu vaccine programme is also happening. So what head teachers and school leaders in the National Education Union are telling me is that they have a date set with Public Health to come to give the vaccine to their children and young people. Often it's being included with the flu vaccine at the same time. The consent forms for the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine are different and complicated. One's online, one's in paper. And managing that process has become yet another thing that school and college leaders have got to do, whilst they are also trying to ensure that education continues in overcrowded classrooms with poor ventilation, because the government still hasn't kept its promise to ensure that every school had a CO2 meter and has done nothing to increase additional ventilation measures such as HEPA air filters. So what we're seeing in education is many local authorities and public health authorities having to take mitigating steps themselves to reintroduce masks, to reduce face-to-face contact in assemblies, things that quite frankly should never have gone away, but the government withdrew from school leaders to be able to do.
Sarah, tell us your situation. You've got a 12 and a 15-year-old. What's the situation with them?
I have a 12-year-old asthmatic child and a 15-year-old child. My 15-year-old contracted COVID last December. We had a wonderful Christmas when he was ill for 19 days and didn't return to full pre-infection health for 5 months. My 12-year-old was unfortunately back to school for 5 days this term before he contracted COVID and was incredibly ill. But luckily we had a fantastic asthma nurse who upped his meds and we kept him out of hospital. So When it comes to the vaccine, we all need to agree on, as Chris Whitty has said, it's not a panacea. It isn't a silver bullet. Our children right now are attending schools where there are none of the scientifically recognised mitigations in place for an airborne virus. We need to remember that COVID is airborne. Everyone can transmit and everyone can contract. Yes, vaccines help with the outcomes, and the negative outcomes from an infection are reduced if you're vaccinated, and that no one can guarantee how your body will react to infection. Georgia Halliday, Portsmouth Academy student, 15 years old, died after contracting COVID. So, there are 96 children who have died in the UK. So saying that it is not, it's a simple infection and all children will recover, that's not true. 53,000 long COVID kids at the minute. So when it comes to the vaccine rollout for 12 to 15-year-olds, I think most parents and teachers would agree, has been shambolic. There was no reason for the decision for it to be released, to be withheld for so long. It could have gone ahead, as other countries around the world did, so that before term started this year, a large majority of those who wanted the vaccine, remember it's not mandatory, could have had it in preparation for returning to overcrowded classrooms that have no ventilation monitoring, that have no ventilation improvements, and where children are told they cannot use a scientifically recognised mitigation method that is used in every other country from ages 6 up in a classroom. I'm talking about face masks. That's the contentious issue that for some reason in the UK we have this British exceptionalist rhetoric where our children cannot be taught good mask hygiene principles or that COVID is airborne or the reasons why. When you're in an indoor setting, you should use one. So what we ended up with is sending all of our children back to schools with any of the scientifically recognised mitigations that were in place, bubbles, a little bit of social distancing, making sure that anyone who is a close contact of a positive case isolates, all of those things gone, and no vaccines. And people are surprised that we're in the situation we are now, that 1 in 12 secondary-aged students is infected with COVID.
And we have almost 200,000 children out of school at the moment. Niamh, what guidance have you been given as a secondary school teacher in Cambridge of what you should be doing at school? Never mind the vaccination rollout, but how you should be running schools, whether you're using bubbles, face masks, ventilation. What advice has been given to you as a teacher?
Well, as Sarah said, the government, the Department of Education, withdrew all of its COVID advice and mitigations before the beginning of this term. So school and college leaders are not within their powers to be able to continue with things that we knew worked to reduce transmission. They're not able to continue with bubbles. They're not able to continue with a rota system. They're not able to continue with a staggered start. So you had all children coming back into school without the vaccine, without masks at the beginning of term, as Sarah said. And then we knew that we were also going into cough and cold season, so respiratory infections transmit at this time of year. We know that the first 6 weeks of half term are the worst for coughs and colds. So what schools and teachers, support staff and leaders are doing is everything they can to continue to ventilate their classrooms, which actually means just opening a window, because the government have not done anything to ensure that additional ventilation measures can take place. And that's just not good enough. This is the second winter of COVID that we've gone into, and it means that children are missing school. It means that teachers are becoming unwell, and it means that local authorities, including Cambridgeshire, my own local authority, has taken the steps with the local health authorities to reintroduce masks, to end face-to-face parents' evenings, to end face-to-face
Can I just interject here a little,
Go on, Sarah.
please? I'd just like to point out that obviously my campaign group SafeEd for All, we've done a lot of awareness raising, and we've met with the opposition leaders. We've done lots and lots of campaigning and trying to raise awareness. What I will point out to all school leaders right now who are listening, and this is a really, really important factor, the guidance is guidance, and it clearly states within the DfE guidance that all health and safety legislation must be adhered to. Health and safety legislation says all risks must be identified, and every risk must be mitigated to the lowest practicable level in order to comply with health and safety legislation. So the DfE have written that in to give themselves the slopey shoulders to stop the legal actions that we are now mounting against them having any kind of traction, because in the first point of call for any legal action that we are taking has to go against individual schools, individual leaders, individual risk assessment signatories, which is wrong. We don't want that. What we need to point out to all school leaders, all local authorities, all heads of multi-academy trusts, the guidance clearly states to you that you must follow all health and safety legislation. The guidance then goes on to tell you what you should do or recommend that you should have assemblies and recommend that you should not have staggered starts and not have bubbles. That is contrary to health and safety legislation. So we understand where they've created this problem and this confusion. However, all school leaders must now make sure that they are covering themselves, follow health and safety legislation, not the guidance.
Okay, just one last question for Niamh. As Sarah's saying, the schools have got the ability to put in mitigating measures, whether it's mask wearing, better ventilation, bubbles. How much kickback have you had from parents who perhaps don't... Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, there is kickback from parents who don't want those mitigations in place, but not as much. Where there is kickback, and this is where, Sarah is right, the individual responsibility should not be on school and college leaders. It should not be on local authorities. It should be on the government. Where the kickback is coming back is from our zealous accountability system, where schools are under pressure from Ofsted to ensure that education continues as normal, regardless of the cost. And that is a ridiculous pressure that school and college leaders are under. That is, they fear from both sides. They fear their college and school communities from getting COVID outbreaks, and they fear Ofsted coming in to tell them that they're doing everything wrong, because that's the feedback that we're getting from our school and college leaders.
Okay. Look, thank you both. Thank you for giving me your time this afternoon. Niamh Sweeney, secondary school teacher in Cambridge, and also an executive member of Teachers Union, of the National Education Union, and also Sarah Saul, parent and campaigner from SafeEd for All. Thank you both.